Throughout the years, I've been a big fan of simulator games that take a few liberties on exactly what they're simulating. Whether it's some kind of farming simulator game like Harvest Moon, a surgery game like Trauma Center, business ones like Roller Coaster Tycoon, or whatever the hell I can think of here. But one that caught my interest a few years ago was Princess Maker 2. It's a child raising simulator where you raise an innocent little girl into an adult. Despite that sounding kind of creepy for someone in their 20s, it may end up on an FBI list. Trust me, this is one of the defining titles that could prove execution can be much better than its premise alone. I quickly want to bring up some of the game's history since this is the second one in the series. If you're a fan of anime, you've probably heard of the developer, Gainax, and if you're a casual fan of it, you might have at least heard some of their work on shows like Gunbuster, Gurren Lagann, Penny and Stocking with Garter Belt, and I couldn't make up that name if I tried, or one of my personal favorites, Neon Genesis Evangelion. I want you to pilot this giant robot. Fuck yeah! Now this game series went into the mid-2000s, spawning a fair amount of video games and even an anime by Gainax themselves. And within the last few years, these games have received published English re-releases. The reason why I say published is there's a company now, Softegg. They translate the DOS version into English, but this never received an official release. But I'll get into the history of how and why this translation was even created and was never truly released in the States. And for the Steam version, which I originally replayed, known as Princess Maker 2 Refined, has a different translation and voice acting. But I'm covering the Softegg/DOS version, but I'll touch upon Refined much later on. But let's finally get into the game. The story starts out in a high fantasy medieval world where worshipping the gods is extremely important. However, eventually people stopped worshipping them, and in return the Lord became very angry and made a pact with the Prince of Darkness upon his people. With doing so, he nearly destroyed the world. What a dick. In other words, if you ever just read the Bible, or just know mythology, don't piss off the gods. Thankfully you, the hero, drove back the Prince of Darkness from whence he came. The king, both impressed and feeling guilty for letting his people fall in the state that they were, offers you a place in the kingdom with a salary to boot. A while passes and on one night a voice calls out, and in the distance, it seems like it's heading towards a hill and you go to investigate it. Only to find out it's a little girl from the heavens, and the goddess asks you to raise her as if she was your own. You of course agree, and from there, the story basically stops, with a scarce amount outside of a yearly festival being held in October, or random events that happen throughout the game. The rest is filled out with how you choose to raise your daughter, and how she takes to your fatherly skills. And from here, I'm going to go into detail on how I raised my daughter, since I feel that would give a good feel on how the game actually plays. Now I may glance over a detail or two since there's a lot to this game, and it all starts with naming my daughter. I'm going to go with Claire because I feel that's just right. And from here, I'll decide my daughter's birthday, and this actually has a lot of importance in the game, since it dictates her starting stats, and where you start her birthday is both where the game starts and stops after 8 years in game have passed. And her blood type, and that plays a little part that I'll get into in just a moment. First, we're introduced to our demon butler Cube, who truthfully I thought was a girl at first. Seriously, he could pass off with a girl with those lashes. But before I get too distracted, he's here to help us take care of Claire if she gets sick, among other things. Now most of the game is delegated to menus, similar to how the original Roller Coaster Tycoon was. Just instead of maintaining a theme park, you just raise your daughter. And every menu serves some sort of purpose that I'll briefly go through. Starting from the top row on the left is most of your stats, covering her general skill set, combat skills, artistic ability, and reputations are self-explanatory. And the next 3 menus consist of you talking to your daughter to see how she feels, or to scold her if she misbehaves, her diet and how much you feed her, and lastly other stats covering her height, weight, and bust. Yeah, this is definitely a product of Gainax. And the last 4 menus are the village where you can buy items, visit the castle to increase your popularity stat that I'll talk about in a little bit, change equipment, and lastly the load and save. But the meat of the game is spent in the schedule menu, where you have to set 3 events per month for your daughter, and everything you decide for her affects her stats, and depending exactly what you have her do, increases some and decreases other stats, and this raises a bit of trial and error with the game's design, since the game doesn't tell you what the jobs or schools do, and you have to figure out everything on your own. And then there's a time you have to learn to know when's the correct time to do some things, or you'll be left with a daughter with a particular stat you don't want decreased, or be in debt if you send her to school too often. And if you don't have money, the rest of the days she's supposed to be in class, nothing happens. I don't blame you if you save scum here. And speaking of debt, the game only gives you a small amount of money each year in September, and your daughter makes up the rest by working or exploring, so trust me when I tell you, take your time sending her to school, instead of spending all of your gold within the first 2 months. So, for the start of the game, I spent balancing her between farming and schooling for fighting to make her obviously into a great fighter one day. And there's 2 things in particular I want to bring up. First is the stress stat. Outside of giving her time off or giving her food, everything you do increases it, and raise it too much and she'll either become a delinquent or become ill. And her becoming a delinquent causes a lot of problems. If you don't supervise her, she might decide to buy a grenade out of spite, thus costing me money that I plan to send her to school with. Or even worse, she could run away and you lose a whole month of doing anything thanks to that. So carefully balancing everything is key if you want a decent ending without a significant amount of headaches along the way. And secondly, when the game starts at Claire as 10, and her being 10, she has the workability of 1. In other words, she's awful at just about everything. But herein lies one of the game's largest strengths. Its sense of progression is done near perfection. There was never once where I thought she wasn't improving in some shape or form from doing anything. I like there's a benefit the longer you keep at something, such as her eventually getting good enough at the job that she no longer messes up, and gets a bonus for a well done job, and even a raise. And more jobs unlock as the years progress, giving more chances to rake in more stats and cash, keeping the progression well paced. Though I'm not sure exactly what sane father would be okay with their daughter working at a sleazy bar by the age of 15, but as soon as Lumberjack became available, I made her into one to really drive the strength stat to its max. Now I avoid talking about the last option in the schedule menu, the adventure option. This is here to break up the consistency of looking at the menus and give her and you something different to do, and surprisingly, this controls like other RPGs of its time, if a bit streamlined, on a smaller scale, and also bundled with some janky scrolling. And here you have 4 maps to choose from to explore, and it is fun, but there's actually quite a few problems with this mode. While exploring can get you a lot of great treasure this way, but the maps never reset, making it pointless to revisit any map after getting everything possible in any given place. Though it's weirder, even if a monster attacks you first, even if you try to flee or talk your way out of a battle, you still get more sin stat for it. I guess this game's just like school. Trying to defend you against a bully, you still get suspended. However, doing these fights are a good way to get a good chunk of gold if you want to get better armor. But outside of that, you really don't get anything. Unfortunately, if you leave early or faint in the dungeon, and she will very often at the start of the game, Cupid will go rescue her and she'll spend the remaining days at home doing nothing. The last thing the game does to help things from getting repetitive is sprinkled very lightly throughout the game as random story events, and these are usually minor and overall have little if any impact on the game. But one for example is a demon noble that visited Claire very early in the game and asked to buy her morals for a flat rate of 380 gold. Or later a merchant offered to sell me numerous mystical items, but the bust increasing one stands out the most. Stay classy. However, while this one isn't quite as random as others, since it will happen during any playthrough a few times, just unknowingly when, is a future teller will tell you what ending you're in store for a small price of course. And if you get her fighter reputation up high enough, random moves will just challenge her to a fight. But the one concrete thing every year is a festival held in every October, and offer a few tournaments for her to partake in. And since I raised a Claire to be a fighter, I put her into the combat tournament, but for the first couple years she couldn't even get past the first round. But through hard training throughout the game, she started winning matches, and eventually the whole tournament twice. And winning any kind of tournament is a really great way to make easy money and turn around the whole entire game for whatever good ending you're trying to go for. There's one additional problem I have with this game, and that's the amount of additional meta knowledge required for certain progression. I brought up earlier the popularity stat and how you have to go to the castle to increase it. However, the game never tells you need certain stats to be able to talk to even just a jester, and they just come off extremely rude until you match these unknown prerequisites. Granted, I'd be lying if my daughter didn't say some rotten things until she hit these required stats. Or even the items from the random event merchant and how to use them. Like, how was I supposed to know to sleep underneath a certain tree for a night with a unicorn flute to summon a unicorn? Or to set a tent from a demon cave for a huge stat boost? Well, outside of that. And lastly, the blood type that you pick at the start of the game both increases her chances for running away and how likely she's to become a delinquent, and the game never tells you. Though this might be more of a culture thing in some Asian countries, including Japan. To grossly summarize it, it's kind of like the astral signs that people use, with no scientific backing. But even with all these problems, there's still a lot of charm and fun to be had with this game, even if it doesn't always tell the player everything. And now with most of the game covered, the last thing to go over is the ending, and there's over 70 of them. which can range from a combination of who she marries, her career, and frankly, a few that will get you judged if you hit the pearly gates. As soon as the game started, I stated I'd raise the Claire as a fighter, mainly having her do lumberjack work as soon as it became available, and pushing her stats for intelligence and to be able to speak well later in the game, since I stockpiled a lot of money from winning tournaments and her job. And with this hard work and somewhat careful planning, I was able to have her become a general for the king, and luckily, she married well and lived well for the rest of her life too. And with all that has been rolled out, the gods thanks you for a good ending, and the game judges you and gives you points for how well you thought you did. And there you have it, that's how I raised my first daughter, keyword being first. Now to give a better understanding of the game, instead of trying to be the best father possible, I'm going to be the worst father possible, and to showcase exactly how differently you can raise your little girl. Now this time, I'm going to name my daughter after one of Gainax's characters, Shinji. With Shinji having a different birthday, she also gets a different goddess. But instead of sending her to school at all, she'll be just working as a cook until the age of 15 when the sleazy bar opens up. Shinji, I need you to get inside the dirty bar. God, no. And doing this actually taught me new things about the game. Like she can become a mistress and make extra money this way, though it wasn't much each month, and that she could fall in love. Outside of that, there's nothing too different compared to raising her like a good father. The gameplay is exactly the same. The largest difference is she runs away a lot more often and sometimes goes to jail. But at the ripe age of 18, when Shinji moves out and follows the man that she fell in love with earlier in the game. Actually, what really happens is he tricks her into becoming a harlot, and she eventually hides after the public finds out. And because of that, both the public and God scolded me about that, and they had regret I raised my daughter that way. I can't say this is unexpected, but playing the game this way did give me another point of view of the game, and just how much it will notice if you try to mess things up. And I love it for that. I really do think Princess Maker 2 is a game worth playing. It really isn't too long, clocking between 4 to 6 hours per playthrough, and I feel it's a proper length for what it's going for, and it helps the replayability skyrocket with the amount of things that you can do. As I've had to the game compete with certain things, and the kind of underbaked light role-playing mechanics, it does a lot right. It felt like I was raising a daughter and that's some things I wanted her to be. Not including Shinji, and the pacing and gameplay did come well together, and I liked the story for what it was, if a little bit lacking on it. But in all honesty, I do recommend playing this game once. If you want something completely different, or if just raising a kid just sounds cool in this kind of setting, I can honestly say go for it. And the final thing to bring up, why are there two translations? Going back to its original release, Gainax was looking for some company to bring this out, and they found the company Soft Egg, who both loved the game and was interested in licensing it from Gainax. Agreements were set, but 3 problems plagued this release. The first one out the gate was getting the code to work on US computers, with a large difference between Japanese and US computers at the time, thus delaying the game over and over again. And usually in game development, you want to find a publisher before you finish up translating the game, but Soft Egg really wanted to show what they had. And this led to the second and third problem. They couldn't find a publisher due to MS-DOS was outdated and Windows 95 was already out, completely killing its release. In the end, Takami Akai, the game's creator, was gifted a complete copy of the game, and a few years later, the English beta, the version I played, was leaked to the internet. And in 2016, we got Princess Maker 2 a fine release on Steam, and compared to the DOS version, it features better graphics, voice acting, and a way to officially buy it. But I do have a problem with this version. It's functionally the same game as far as I could tell, but the translation itself feels like it wasn't by someone who quite knows how to take a Japanese sentence and make it sound natural in English. It just feels awkward and not double checked and localized by a native English speaker. There's always going to be a huge debate between direct translation versus localization, but it feels like the translation worked with an RPG released in the 90s and not the 2010s. However, I can tell you guys, even with this problem, it doesn't take away how good the game is. I just prefer the Soft Egg translation over the one that we officially got. And that's it, folks. Thank you from the bottom of my heart watching this all the way through. I usually stream on Twitch most days of the week, however, I want to experiment with a little bit of YouTube content, just for the fun of it, honestly. I also have a Twitter account if you want to go follow that. I usually post up art or whatever on there. But thank you so much, everyone. You take care, have a wonderful day, take care, and please be safe.